We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Amud Aleph in Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 100a. And the previous Amud, the Gemara listed various individuals who are not allowed to collect truma by the granaries. Two of the individuals were the Tumtum and the Androgynous, and the Gemara explains the reason why they can't collect the truma at the Goren is because Birya Bifnei Atzman, they're considered their own creatures, they're unusual creatures. As Rashi over here says, Birya Bifnei Atzman v'havezilusa dekachim. Again, that would be a disgrace to the Kachim if they were going to collect the Truma in this kind of a public manner. And the Gemara continues, Eved Nami also. In Eved we understand why he can't collect the Goren. Dil Ma'asi Lasuke Mitruma Liyuchsin, similar to what we said on the previous Amud. Maybe people are going to say that since he's collecting Truma, it must be he has Yichus, it must be that he's actually a Kohen, and that's not really true. He's really just the Eved of a Kohen. Orel v'tamei, what about somebody who is uncircumcised or somebody who is tamei, mishum demeisi, because again that's considered to be disgusting, it's not appropriate to give them the truma. No say isha she'ena hoganes lo. Let's say you have a Kohen who married a woman who is not fit to marry a Kohen. She's disqualified from the Kahuna. Why can't he take the truma at the Goren mishum kanasa? That's a fine because he violated the prohibition. And because he married someone he wasn't supposed to marry, he's not allowed to collect truma at the Goren. Elo isha my time alone. But the Gemara asks, why is it that a woman, why can't she come and collect truma at the Goren? And so the Gemara says, Plingi bar Rav Papa v'Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua. This is a machlokas amoraim between Rav Papa and Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua. Chad omer mishum grusha, v'chad omer mishum yichud. One says the reason is because of grusha, and the other one says the reason is because of yichud. Rashi over here explains, mishum grusha shema yigrashena bala, because maybe your husband divorced her. V'hizar, and in that case, she's considered to be like a non-Kohen. V'lo yadi inish, but people don't realize that. Upalgilan, they're going to give her truma. So in other words, the inchi, the people, they don't realize, and so therefore that's reason number one. And reason number two is because of yichud. In other words, the idea is we're afraid that this woman is going to be alone in the granary together with the owner of the truma, the person who's distributing it, and that could be a problem. So again, these are the two possible reasons why a woman is not allowed to collect the truma in the Goren. And the Gemara continues, Mai Beinayu, so what's the difference between the two opinions? And the Gemara says, Ika Beinayu, the difference between the two opinions is as follows, Beidari to Mekariv Lamasa Velo Shchichi. You might have a granary that's close to the city, so everybody's going to know that this woman was or was not divorced, so divorce is not going to be an issue. However, Lo Shchichi, there's not a lot of people that come to this granary, so you do have a legitimate problem of Yichud. Velo Shchichi Buinshi, again, there's not a lot of people that frequent this granary. Inami, or you can have a difference in the opposite kind of a case, the Merachik, that it's far from the town, so people will have no idea whether this woman is divorced or not, so divorce can actually be a problem. However, there are people that do frequent this granary, and therefore in such a situation, yichud is not going to be a problem. And the Gemara continues, the Braisa on the previous Amud said, V'kulon mishagrid lehem levatei, and all of these individuals in the list, you're allowed to send them truma to their houses, chutz mitame v'nose isha she'ena hoganes lo, except for a situation of somebody who was tamei, or let's say somebody who married a woman that was disqualified from the kuna. Those people, you don't even send them the truma to their houses. So the Gemara says, Aval Orel, but when it comes to the Kohen who's uncircumcised, Mishagrinale, so we do send to him. Why do we make the distinction between an Orel and a Tameh? Both of them, the reason was similar, was because it's Meisi, it's considered disgusting to give them Truma in a public fashion. So again, why by a Tameh do we say that you're not allowed to send the Truma to his house, but by an Orel you could? And the Gemara says, my time, and what's the reason? Mishum Donis, because by an Orel, it's something beyond his control, meaning to say, his brothers died because of bris milah, so he couldn't get a bris milah. This is something totally beyond his control, so you can send the Truma to his house. So the Gemara says, Tamei Nami, ha'anis. When it comes to a Tamei also, isn't it also beyond his control? He didn't become Tamei on purpose, something happened, and he became Tamei. And so the Gemara answers, Hai nafish onse. When it comes to the situation of an Arel, the onus is great, meaning it was really completely beyond his control. V'hailo nafish onse. But when it comes to a situation of a Tameh, that's not something totally beyond his control. The person can take some measures to protect himself from Tumah, and so therefore by the individual who is Tameh, we do not send him Truma to his house. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Ha'eved va'isha, when it comes to an Eved and Isha, in Cholkin lehem Truma b'beis agronos, we do not distribute Truma to them in the granary. Uv'makom shecholkin, and in places where we do distribute it to them, nosnin le'isha tchila, we give to the woman first, upochuno samiyad, and that way she can leave immediately. And so the Gemara asks, my Kamra, what exactly is this Braisa saying? First you say that we don't distribute it to the woman in the granary, and then you say in places where we do distribute. What does that mean? So the Gemara says, Hachi Kamar, this is what it means to say. B'makom shecholken meiser ani. In areas where we're distributing meiser ani, there we do distribute to the women. So nosin leisha tchila, you give the woman first. My time, and what's the reason? Mishum zilusa, because it's demeaning for her to stand around while the men are there. It's better to give her immediately, give her first, so she can leave right away. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Mereisha ki avosu gavra v'ita soladina kamoi. In the beginning, when a man and a woman would come to the court before me, have a sharina tigra de gavra bereisha, I would first do the court case of the man. Amina, because I said to myself, the mechayev mitzvahs, he's chayev in mitzvahs, he should go first. But kevan de shamana loha, but now that I heard this idea that it's demeaning for the women to stand around while the men are there, so sharina tigra dita bereisha, so instead I hear the court case of the woman first. My time, and what's the reason? Again, mishum zilusa, because it's demeaning for them to stand around, so it's better that they should go first. And Rashi over here says, Hachi kamar hai b'makom shecholkin, when it says over here in places where it is distributed to the women, lava truma kai, we're not going on truma. V'hachi kamar, here's what the Bryce is saying, v'davar shecholkin nami l'nashim, when you have something which is distributed to the women, could go in Maiserani, for example, Maiserani shu mischalik v'soch habayis ba'ir, because Maiserani is distributed inside of the house in the city. It's not given by the granary. Vein kan mishum yichud, and there's no issue of yichud, shchichi inshi, because there's a lot of people there. So nosin l'isha tchila, you should give the woman first, mishum dezila b'mil salamekum, because again it's demeaning for her to stand there while the men are there. And Rashi says, Maiserani and mischalik begorin, Maiserani is not distributed in the granary, ela b'soch habayis, rather it's given out inside the house, k'dechsiv, like the pasuk says, lager liyasam v'lo almana, etc. V'yod mishum delo lichsefu aniyim, and furthermore we don't want the aniyim, they shouldn't be embarrassed, and that's why we do it inside of the house. Gavra v'itasa zet tovea baldino v'zu tovas baldino. Again, you have two separate court cases, a man coming in, a woman coming in. Vein hadin ben shneim. We're not talking about a court case between the man and the woman. So originally, sharina tigra de gavra bereisha. Originally, I used to take the man's case first. Hayisi nizkak lishtchila ligmor esdino. I wanted to finish up his case. V'achakach hayisi nizkak loden bein ishu vein baldino. And then I would take the case of the woman. And then again, Rava says, once he heard this idea that it's a zilusa, so he took the woman's case first. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Higdilo taroves v'chulu. Again, the Mishnah talked about a case where you have one child who's a Kohen and one child who's the slave of a Kohen. We don't know which one is which. So it said if they free each other, and then the Mishnah went on to say the various halachos that apply. So the Gemara says, Shichru iboy ini lo boy lo. If they free each other, meaning if they want to free each other, they could. If they don't want to, they don't have to. V'amai, why should it even be an option? Lisa shifcha eno yachol, baschorn eno yachol. Right now in the situation as is, meaning where it's a suffix, he can't marry a shifcha, he can't marry a baschorn, they can't get married, and therefore we should force them to free one another in order that they should be able to get married. And so the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, you're right. Ema, rather, the Mishnah should say, Kovenosan, that we do force them. Umeshachrin says, then they have to free each other again in order to enable them to get married. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Nosan alein chumre v'chulu. Again, you have a situation of these individuals. We don't know whether they're Kohanim or the person is a Yisrael. So he said you have to put the stringencies of Kohanim on him and also the stringencies of a Yisrael. And so the Gemara says, Lamai hilchasa, for what practical halacha are we talking about over here? Amar Papa says, Lemin chasam, we're talking about their carbon mincha. Nikmet says, Keminchas Yisrael. Let's say this individual brings a carbon mincha. So you are going to take the kometz, that's like the mincha of a Yisrael. Ve'eino nacheles keminchas Kohanim, but it's not eaten, and that is similar to the mincha of the Kohanim. The mincha of the Kohanim is entirely burned on the Mizbeach. And the Gemara explains, Hakeitzad, how so? HaKometz karav bi'atzmo, the kometz is brought on the Mizbeach by itself. V'hashirayim, and the remainder as well, kareven ba'atzman, they're also brought on their own by themselves. But the Gemara asks, Ikri kan shkol shemi menu leishim hareu bebal taktiru. But don't we have over here a principle that anytime you put some on the fire, in other words, like in this case where you're putting the kometz and you're burning it on the mizbeach, so there's actually a prohibition of bal taktiru. There's a prohibition that you're not allowed to burn the remainder on the mizbeach. So how is it that you're bringing the kometz and then also bringing the shirayim that would seem to be not allowed? And so the Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Breder Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, answers, Demasiklu l'shum eitzim karev elazar. What you do is, you burn the remainder just as fuel for the Mizbeach, and that follows the sheet of Rabbi Elazar. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brayso, Rabbi Elazar says, L'reach nichoach iatomala. You're not allowed to burn it to be as a carbon, to be again pleasant before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Aval atomala l'shum eitzim, but you're allowed to use it for fuel. The Gemara says, Hanichol Rabbi Elazar. Well, that's good according to Rabbi Elazar, who says you can bring it, that it should be l'shum eitzim. Ela l'Rabbanan ma'ikol l'meimar. But according to the Rabbanan, what are you going to say? They don't allow the solution of l'shum eitzim to use it for fuel. And to that, the Gemara answers, Da'avid lo Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. You can do a solution like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brayso, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says, HaKometz karav le'atzmo, he can bring the kometz on its own, v'hashirayim, and the remainder mispazrin al beis hadesh, and they can be scattered over the ashes. ashes. V'afilu Rabbanan lo pligi oled Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon el b'minchas chote shel kohanim debas hakravahi. Even the Rabbanan, they only argue on Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon when you actually have a minchas chote of an actual kohen, which needs to be brought on the mizbeach. So there they say it can't be scattered over the Beis Hadeshin. Aval hacha, but over here we have a situation of a suffix. You don't know if this guy's a kohen. Afilu Rabbanan modu. Even the Rabbanan would admit that you can scatter the shirayim over the Beis Hadeshin. And Rashi over here explains, Minchas Yisrael nikmetzes v'shireh ne'acholim. When it comes to the carbon mincha v'Yisrael, so you put the komets on the mizbeach, you burn it on the mizbeach, and you eat the rest of it. K'echsev v'kamatz v'anoseres mimenu yochlo arnavanav u'minchas kohen ein nikmetzes. But when it comes to the mincha of the kohen, so there's no komets over there. Lefi shekula kol, you burn the whole thing. Shenemar kol minchas kohen kol tiyeh. V'echad mitaruvas halol shemisnade mincha. So one of these individuals who's mixed up, we don't know if he's a kohen or Yisrael. So let's say he wants to donate a mincha tzricha kamitza. So you have to do komets shami Yisrael. Maybe he's a Yisrael. If you don't do the kometz, it's going to be puzzle, just like a carbon that wasn't shechted. But you can't eat the shirayim, you can't eat the leftover, dilma kohen, because maybe he's a kohen, and the whole thing needs to be burned. And so then the Gemara says, 1 second, Ikri kan, hechi motzi magdulu l'shirayim, but how can you burn the remainder on the mizbeach? V'dilma minchas Yisraeli, maybe really he is a Yisrael, v'shirayim gemurim heim, and this is really shirayim, v'harein bebal taktir, and there's actually a prohibition to burn them on the mizbeach. T'chsev, like the pasuk says, lo saktiru mimenu isha la'Hashem kol shemimenu le'ishim sheniktar heimenu davar haroi lahaktir. It says anything that you took from it, something that is fit to be on the mizbeach, like in this case of the komets, harei ashirai bebal taktiru. The remainder, it's actually a prohibition to burn it on the mizbeach. And so then the Gemara answered, "V'el mizbeach lo yalu l'reich nichoach." It can't be l'reich nichoach. You can use it as fuel. Basrei da'ikor de lo saktiru ksiv. That's right after this pasuk of lo saktiru. Milsid Rebbe Elazar b'zvachim perakat harovis. You can find this opinion of Rebbe Elazar in Mesechet Zvachim. And Rashi over here continues. Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon Omer again. Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon was the one that says that your komets karev liatzmo. You burn the komets on the mizbeach and the shirayim, they get scattered on the Beis Hadeshin on the ashes. So Rashi explains, Gabi kohen hamitami mikdosh bedali dalos shemevi minchas chote. We're talking here specifically about a kohen who's mitami mikdosh and he brings a carbon minchas chote. V'chasab ba minchas chote v'haisel hakohen kamincha kolomar chote is a kohen who. It says over there that if the sinner is a kohen who's bringing this carbon, harei keminchas Yisrael. It's actually treated like the mincha of Yisrael. Ma minchas Yisrael nikmetzes, af minchas chote shel kohanim nikmetzes. Just like by a minchas Yisrael, you take the kmitza, you burn the kmitza on the mizbeach, the komets on the mizbeach. So too by the minchas chote of the kohanim. Ima minchas Yisrael shireh nechol and avzu shireh nechol. The Gemara says, well, if that's the case, like a minchas Yisrael, maybe we should eat also the leftover. Talmud lomer v'chol minchas kohen kolel tiyeh. It says no. When it comes to the minchas kohen, it has to be totally burned. Hakeitzad haso hakomets kar biatzmon v'ashirayim krevos la'atzmon. Divrei Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Shimon says, what do? You bring the komets by itself, burn it on the mizbeach, and the same thing with the shirayim. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer, and then the brisa continues over here that Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, he says, hakomets kar v'liatzmon v'ashirayim mispazron ha'beis hadeshin lamata. He says that the shirayim, they're not brought on the mizbeach, rather they're scattered on the ashes that are down below. Makam shenos and sham trumas hadeshin. That's where you put the trumas hadeshin. V'hanotza v'hainu eitzel mizbeach. That's an area right next to the mizbeach. V'yadkan lo pligi rabban alev yomru the shirayim karevim. Now the Rabbanan only argued and said that you should bring the shirayim on the mizbeach, el b'minchas chote kohen, except for this specific case by the minchas chote of the kohen, to svirulu kula bas hakravi keminchas nidvaso, because they say it's all considered something that should be brought on the mizbeach, like the carbon mincha that he donates. Aval ha'acha de lo matzil hakruvim mishum shem azaru. But here again, we're talking about a suffix situation. You can't bring it on the mizbeach because he might be a zar. The shirayim gemurim him, they might be real shirayim ubebal taktir, and they're not allowed to be burned. So afilu Rabbanan modu de mispazron. Even the Rabbanan would admit that it gets scattered by the Beis Hadeshin. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Misha lo sho'asa achar bala shlosha chadashim. Let's say you have a woman who didn't wait 3 months. Let's say her husband died and she got remarried too quickly. It was within the 3 months. V'nisis, and she gets married. V'yod, and she gives birth to a child. V'en yoduim ben tisha l'rishon and ben shiva la'achron. And you don't know whether this child is a 9-month child from the first husband or is it a 7-month child from the second husband. So in that situation, hayu lo banim min harishon ubanim min hasheni. If she had children from the first husband and she had children from the second husband as well, and then let's say there's a death over here, you have a situation of yibum, so cholzin v'lo miyavmin, so they should do chalitza and they shouldn't do yibum because you really don't know this particular child, who is he a brother of, meaning a paternal brother? Is he a brother of the children from the first husband, or he's a paternal brother of the children of the second husband? Rashi over here says, Cholzin v'lo miyavmin le'ishto shel safek zeh. In other words, this safek dies, and now his wife is the widow, so they have to do chalitza. B'nei harishon cholzin, the first ones, the sons of the first husband, they have to do chalitza. Shema ben avim haya, because maybe he really was the son of their father. But v'lo miyavin, but they can't do yivam. Shema ben achronu, because maybe he's really the son of the second husband. V'harei achein minoaim v'lo minav, he might be their maternal brother and not the paternal brother. V'zu aleim b'karis, that would be a problem of karis. V'chein b'nei achron, and exactly the same applies to the children of the second husband. V'chein hu l'neshoseim, the same thing applies to their wives as well. And the Mishnah continues, V'chein hu lahem cholitz v'lo miyavim, similarly him to them. Let's say one of them dies, so he should do chalitza and he should not do yibam. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Amud Beis.